Good morning. So today we'll be assessing the benefits of interpreting and analyzing visual art on the brain and cognitive effects. And from careful examination of our current U.S. education system, we can conclude that our education system should prioritize art education. To provide a bit of context about our education under the Trump administration, 19 major arts funding organizations are currently being expelled. And this includes the National Endowment for Humanities, the National Endowment for Arts, and more specifically, City Arts, which is an organization originating in Rhode Island, specifically to provide access to art for underprivileged children in the northern region of the country. And so according to Mick Mulvaney, Donald Trump's budget director, when addressing specific budget allocations, he specifically stated, "We are not going to ask for your hard-earned money for the non-proper functions." And so in this context, the arts are not necessarily something that the Trump administration prioritizes today. And so neurologically, to provide context about how the brain visualizes stimuli, so the visual cortex is the area in the brain that is able to bridge illusion and reality by transforming 2D to 3D representations. And we can see this mechanism in the world of 3D pavement art. And so in this piece by Joe Hill here, our brain's depth perception is challenged when we look at elusive art such as this. And what this means is when our brain detects illusions, what it does is it filters images through what is called a depth gradient filter. And this is from Ava Zucchi's findings. She's a neurological professor. And so when we look at this image, our brain instinctively, so it naturally pieces together a cohesive image. What it does is it tries to locate groups of individual pixels with similar color, contrast, and size. And then from there, it pieces together these groups to form a cohesive image. And from here, we can obviously see that the warm tone area is right here, and 2D representations and abstractions can be transformed into 3D representations. Moving on to our next stimulus material from Sense and Sensibility. All organisms have evolved to recognize sensory information in the environment and transmit this information to the brain, where it must then be processed to create an internal representation of the external world. And so René Magritte, among other surrealists, exercised the brain, and these surrealists analyze the outside world. They embody the ability to recognize outside stimuli. They analyze the elements observed. They articulate them distinctly, and then they pose questions. And all these mechanisms have been proven to increase the brain's flexibility and stereopsis. And so when looking at the mechanisms of analyzing art, first, artists and surrealists specifically have to pay attention to outside stimuli. They have to pay keen attention to the world around them to process that data and then convey it back into art. And so next, what artists do is they analyze the observed elements, and they prioritize what is there and omit what is not there. So in this piece by René Magritte, it is evident that Magritte has decided to omit natural elements in the world, such as the sun, for example. We don't see the sun in this piece. When we look at the outside world and then transform it back into art, we naturally process what is important. And so moving on, artists communicate succinctly. Art is all about expression, and artists effectively capture emotion. And so René Magritte here has captured, for example, homesickness and nostalgia and bewilderment. And lastly, artists pose questions, which is the most important cognitive element of creating and analyzing art. Based on gathering all this data from the outside world and piecing it back together into a single cohesive image, questions are posed about the overall meaning of the piece. Aside from looking at art on a macrocognitive level, we can look at art as a means of benefiting mental well-being. For example, there's a direct correlation between happiness and creativity. According to a study conducted by the University of North Carolina, there's an increase in blood flow when we view art by 10%, which is actually the same rate of blood flow when we look at a loved one. And in terms of embodied cognition, this is a process in which when we look at art, we are able to immerse ourselves in the world that is portrayed in the piece. For example, if we were to look at a painting of a beach, we can feel the sand beneath our feet and the wind in our hair, for example. And this ties back to another stimulus material called extrasensory perception, in which we are able to transport ourselves to different areas without actually doing so. And so these are the non-artistic benefits of art in the real world. Now the main argument against art education in our curriculum is that art doesn't necessarily provide a means for people to connect to the real world. And so in investigative crime, because art demands such investigative skills, when in the scene of a crime, for example, people, if they're accustomed to analyzing art, they can be able to describe suspects physically for sketch artists with accuracy. Also, because art demands such keen attention to the outside world, this in turn makes the brain more susceptible to paying keen attention to details at a crime scene. And in terms of medical analysis, treating a patient requires observing what is absent and observing what is there. So back to what I said about when we create or analyze art, we have to pay attention to what is there and what is not there in the piece. When doctors diagnose patients, not only do they have to look at the symptoms that are there, but they have to look at the symptoms that are not there to correctly diagnose. And so the arts in education, if we apply the benefits of arts to our curriculum, as a solution, we should prioritize the arts. And now the creation of art as a core class, if we create art as a class that's equal to mathematics in terms of importance and weight, then students will be able to exercise their minds more efficiently. And encouragement of an artistic atmosphere in schools will actually harbor positivity and again contribute to mental well-being and happiness and creativity. And so effects on children are as follows. The brain development significantly enhances. The visual cortex, as mentioned earlier, will become more adaptable, more flexible in transforming our 3D world back into 2D images. Critical thinking skills are also boosted as people analyze art and consider what a piece means and how it correlates to outside stimuli. And so the distraction effect, very briefly, is so there was a study conducted on children at the University of North Carolina in which students under particularly difficult circumstances were required to draw something, and students, when students were distracted by the drawing, and this in turn increased their mood. So as a result, drawing is actually a wonderful tool for students. Now the limitations of art education in our curriculum are as follows. Art is actually very expensive in terms of the supplies it demands. For example, Pentel is a very costly supply company. Even art interpretation requires expensive textbooks. This is the main reason for omission from the curriculum. And in terms of the mind, a limitation of art on the brain actually is stress. Now, art is an intensive project-based learning experience. It's not labor extensive, and it doesn't allow for much time. It's actually labor intensive, and time is limited. So spikes in stress will possibly be a result for students if we're talking about cognitive functions. Thank you.
Now I gotta ask you some questions.
Oh, that's right.
Alright, so how did you select the strategies you used to gather information to conduct your research? And were those strategies effective?
All right, so my main strategy for this presentation in particular was using visuals. Because my presentation is about art, I really had to think about the kind of material I have to present. Initially, I decided on presenting other stimulus materials such as the historian as participant, really text-heavy based materials. But I strategized around this. I decided to use visuals such as 3D pavement art to communicate how the brain directly, how analyzing art directly affects the brain.
Okay. And explain your level of certainty you have about your conclusion.
Okay, so my conclusion that arts should be prioritized in the curriculum. In terms of my certainty, there's a bit of detail that hinders that certainty, and that's generalization. I feel as if when considering arts in the education from a cognitive approach, there's a bit of generalization that goes on, and we can't fully wrap our minds around how students' brains work in full. So there's a bit of uncertainty behind that.
All right, thank you.